Hey, all you good folks out there in the land of plenty. Hope you're having a good one on this Monday, December 29th, as we come to the close of 2025. Hope everybody's enjoying the holiday festivities. If you're into it, some people are probably over it by now. Um, Definitely big fan of this season. Can't help but getting caught up in all of the good feelings. As a cinema lover, my boys and I love to get into the Christmas movies. We've got our run that we go through, typically going from Die Hard and Home Alone, the silly ones, and then as we get closer to Christmas, the more classics. It's a Wonderful Life, of course, always gets me every year. I got to watch it every year. I actually watched the color version this year, and yeah, it's just off. It's odd. Definitely prefer the original black and white. The color seemed like sort of a derivative, the original with the way they did the coloring. I mean, it's beautiful, uh, and it's almost like a painting in a way, moving paintings, the way that they do that process. But uh, yeah, it's like a Norman Rockwell painting in motion. But man, I love that movie, and of course, we watched Scrooge, the 19 what is that 72 musical? Is it 72 with Albert Finney? What year is that? It's in the 70s, I think. But what a great musical, total classic. And 1970, Albert Finney, Alec Guinness, of course, is his buddy in chains. And yeah, so anyways, we love the holidays for the films, for the lights and the walks to check out um, the neighborhood, and just the overall merriment that abounds in our house and with our family. My parents are out of town this year. They usually spend Christmas with us. They were visiting my sister back in Detroit area, so it was just the fam, and then we had some visitors during the holidays, which was nice. But it was nice to have a quiet, chill, just core family unit celebration this year. Quite peaceful. Had a lot of rain. Not much snow though. It was warm. Finally got a bit of snow up in the mountains. We're looking to get our first ski day in at the end of the week, hopefully, up at our local mountains. So, but yeah, been at the river, fished earlier today. Gonna try to surf tomorrow. Life is good. Also got some good reading in. Been reading, getting back into my favorite stuff, the Gothic, the Victorian era English literature. I'm reading, getting into the Bronte sisters, and I'm reading Charlotte Bronte's Jayne Eyre. I'm about, wow, over three quarters through it already. Just flying through this book. I love it. I love this style of writing, the eloquence, the way that they speak, and the mastery of the English language is just so nourishing to my mind. I just fly through these books. I like the sort of the gothic allure of the ghosts and spirits, and of course the deep sort of philosophical adherence to the higher ideals of having a divine creator and standing up for one's moral self. And the character Jane Eyre, while she is not wealthy in her own right, ends up, I don't want to give too much away for those who haven't read it, but she is classic kind of Dickens like tale, coming up as an orphan with an abusive stepmother of sorts, or really it's, I guess, an aunt. That's right. It's like a step aunt who, not even a step aunt, her aunt takes her into her household and is quite abusive, and as are her cousins, and her male cousin literally physically beats her. And then she goes to a boarding school, and which is quite um, yeah, it's pretty brutal in its austerity, and she's basically starving and freezing to death at times. But long story short, she makes it out as a governess for a spoiled little French girl in an English manor, and romance basically comes. Of course, it's got to be a romance, a romantic tale, right, with her and the master there in the house. But she stands up for herself throughout the book, even as she's a little girl in these really dire situations. She finds the strength to stand up for herself, and she always adheres to a strict moral inner guidance. And she's autonomous. No matter what position she has in society, she's able to maintain a sense of autonomy. I will, once I finish this book, probably do a whole review of it, just because there's a lot to get into in terms of the romanticism around that time. And man, it's just at times I just want to go back to then. Even the servants and many, I mean, I know this is fiction, but I feel like even the servants, if they had a great master, had a pretty good life and were happy to have that existence. Um, of course, we're all servants now on the plantation. And this got me thinking about, though, this idea of autonomy and having autonomy and how important that is, when the understanding, of course, in this book, that this just basic understanding that we have free will, there is a creator, and bestowed upon us by the creator is this notion of autonomy, that no matter our station in life, we in the end, if we stand up for ourselves, can decide to do what's right. So important. And those who wish to control and wish to dominate the world, and I think ironically a lot of those are not the traditional master of the manor that we get in these books. The aristocracy, actually, a lot of them were content with having, yes, the order set. And I'll get into this as I do a review on Jane Eyre, because this is, I don't want to get off the topic of today too much, but I think what we're seeing in the 20th and 21st century is, as we've abandoned that old world sensibility, is the dark, I would say, the black magicians, right? The dark magicians who worked in the shadows at that time have really are going for broke, and collapsed that old world of civilized manner aristocracy in the landed gentry, so that we all could be servants on planet on the spaceship planet Earth, as they like to call it, as they try to demystify this idea that we're in a magical realm, of course. But and in doing that, that was the great plan that was initiated in the late 19th century into the early 20th century, of course, with the collapse of bus boom and bust cycles of centralized money, fiat money markets, the use of communism and Bolshevism, of course, to take out the great mother Russia, and then to initiate World War I, World War II, and in doing that also the quote unquote industrial revolution, which would then turn into a technological revolution, and really the means to use technology as governance. So no longer will we have the gentry class, the parliamentary decision making, the quote unquote democratic process, or even the sovereignty of a king to rule his people. But instead, the idea is sort of this Promethean concept of taking God completely out of the system, completely denying God through technology. Yeah, so literally technology is governance now, and with that, the use of automation as a means to erode autonomy. Because as long as an individual has autonomy, as Jane Eyre stood up to her master, even though she was completely in love with him, but because he had broken a code, in a deep, deep moral code for her. The same with those who wish to be our masters. Understand that even if people are destitute, they still can find autonomy if they have an ability to think for themselves, to be connected with a higher spirit, a higher will force, some sort of higher means, right? Out that transcends materiality. And so, what they do is they decide to create a whole new mechanized automation system that dehumanizes through automation, through technology, and really, of course, by replacing spirituality and religion with scientism. This goes way back, to Francis Bacon, the New Atlantis, the 17th, 16th centuries. They've been working on this for a long time, and I say black magicians because people like to point at all these groups: the Masons, the Jews, the Sabbatine, Frankists, or whatever. Like, there's all these. I think that's what David Icke says. They're all the black ordered priest class that goes back to the cult of Belial that in Atlantis times that Edgar Casey talks about. It's always the same. It's good versus evil. It's plain as day as that. We can point fingers at groups, but really we're talking about an energetic here and a priest class that tries to always use this evil energetic to control the world. And so they've essentially they've figured out, okay, well, we can't do it through through traditional dominance, through a master slave dialectic. We have to have essentially we have to take the human completely out of the equation, and in doing that, then the dehumanization will allow for this separation of spirit and complete separation of spirit and matter. Meanwhile, they worship and use all the occulted spiritism stuff still. But yeah, this goes way back, and so I'm thinking, about this idea though of autonomy and automation, and that made me think of my boy James Tunney, who we've interviewed a few times when I was doing AlphaCast. I'd like to interview James on a conversation for Wintercast. I think that would be fun. I got to interview him actually one-on-one for the end of COVID as well, and that was a fantastic discussion, very much in alignment with what I'm talking about right now. He had written a book a couple years back called Plantation of the Automatons, Rule of an Automatacity Loop, where he's specifically talking about this, the end of autonomy through automation via cybernetics, AI, robotics, the virtual world being implanted. Excuse me. And so yeah, I brought that book out. I highly recommend it. I'm going to be bringing back the old book list too. I'll have a link on. I'll be dropping that link in my Substack. I'm also launching my YouTube channel. These will go on. So, but I'll have a link to this book, and in it he really lays out the history of going back to Bacon and before, leading up to now, and we are now facing automation governance outside the jurisdiction of law. I often talk about law as a solution, and it is, but these really wily controllers saw that any sort of system that can have firm control over consciousness needs to essentially run out of the purview of any legality or lawful systems. And so automation, what it does is it really allows for governance and through a perceived consensus to automate in the background and prelude any sort of actual political or legislative regulation, because it's already working in the background. It's already essentially running the world, running society. So I wanted to lay out sort of how they've been able to do this, where we're at. And this really came up because on Christmas evening, I believe it was, we had a visitor, and she was asked, it sort of came up with my wife and I, and am I concerned about with where things are going with CBDCs and the digital ID and social credit scores? And is this going to be a reality here? And are they going to be able to throttle our bank accounts and blah, blah, blah? And I said, well, before we can tackle that, we need to know really what's going on and what is actually happening and how is this being implemented. Obviously, most listening to me don't live in China, so aren't currently under a sort of technocratic regime that is in your face, state run technocracy like in China, where they already have the social credit system. They don't have the digital currency, that sort of thing set up, but they've got sort of the digital ID and the social credit system. And they're working towards, I'm sure, some sort of digital currency that they can use as leverage to control. And that's going to be a big part of what I'll be covering. This will probably end up being a series on this, but to understand sort of how the plumbing is being laid out, I think it's important before we can even get into, am I concerned? What is the solution? So one of the Substack channels that I've really been enjoying that I highly recommend um, is called what is it? It's ETC. Let me find it real quick because it's just ETC. Um, ESC. Sorry, Escape Key. It's just Escape Key is what it's called. And I don't know who's behind this. I recently discovered it. I've been enjoying the articles. And one of the series that this person is doing right now is on this automation. So funny enough, as I'm thinking about this, I see this pop up in my feed. Go algorithm, right? So he lays out, I would assume is a he just from the writing style. I may be wrong, maybe a she, maybe a they. I don't know its pronouns, but lays out how this sort of automation governance is being set up. And yeah, it's really well researched and well done. So I highly recommend this channel. I'll put the link below. But literally, we're talking about sort of what many times I've covered is sort of scientism as the base religion to then use as sort of the epistemological foundation for a worldwide technocratic governance, right? And this was initiated in the modern era, specifically out in the open. He talks about Escape Key talks about 1941, the Science and World Order Conference in the UK. It was in London during the World War II, and it represents an early moment where the argument was put cleanly on the table. The modern world is too complex for ordinary politics to manage. Expert knowledge must therefore guide political decisions, and planning must be systematic, rational, and scalable. So the idea of using the scientific method as the base foundation for how we perceive reality and how we sort of lay out um, the entire process for managing society, managing culture, managing people. So science is how we understand the world, right? It's purely based on data, using common methods and categories. So it's categorizing things. It's analytic, right? It's logical, but it's based on the epistemological idea of induction, right? And so it's very quantitative. It takes out the sort of obviously, this idea of a Platonic notion that there is a higher substantive form, right? A higher spiritual realm that is outside the scope of man's ability to scientifically come to conclusions based on inductive reasoning. It takes all that out and it puts us firmly into the material world only through the scientific process. So, with the aim to maximize efficiency and really just purify that output, right? It's about the output. It's about the data signifying reality. So now we are quantifying everything with numbers, with symbols, and putting everything into equations, right? And so it's totally obviously taking God out of the picture, taking any sort of art, any sort of breathable expression of reality, nuance, etc., right? basically taking the life out of reality. And so that was sort of the introduced at that time. Of course, once again, this goes back to the 17th century, and we've got um, the whole Enlightenment and um, pushing forth French Revolution, and with the Enlightenment, of course, was the initiation of not only the scientific method but really atheism, and then that with Darwin, and then of course Marx. We get into social Darwinism and the idea that we're all just from goo to the zoo, right? Or is it from goo by means of the zoo to you? I don't know. I'm not Dr. Seuss, but so within that, that's the epistemological foundation, and then there's going to be a need now for people to not reject that. We need to base that in some sort of morality, right? And what is the sort of the basis for people to agree to this type of mechanistic thinking and activity, and that is through developing this whole ethics of globalization, I'll call it, right? Just think of like ESG um, goals, right? The sustainability, these ideas of things need to be inclusive. It's this green thinking, this having a social balance of equity. Inclusivity, right, is the big buzzword. If you read any World Economic Forum paper on, for instance, I was reading stuff on the digital twin, which I'll get into, and some of these other, um, essential um, automation protocols they're trying to launch. Always they have to tie it into this ethic, and if you're bucking this ethic, then you're going against the greater good of of humanity, right? You're selfish. You're killing grandma. Taking it back to COVID. COVID is, by the way, the greatest rollout example of how all this was implemented as a huge test, which I can get into in a little bit. So you've got that ethic foundation, which we've seen now in many ways fracturing right now. I will be doing a post on a potential rejection of all this and a new renaissance coming into the 2030s, and a big part of that will be Cordal. But as of now, we're looking deep down the dark tunnel of this moving forward. And so I'll be continuing to break this down in a series of how this automation governance is being rolled out, because it's important that we understand the history and how this is being implemented. And of course, then in order to, so they actually had in 1942 a science and ethics conference in London where they develop a lot of this terminology. 42 guys. So I mean, they've been working on this for a long time. We know there's the Club of Rome and the Council of Foreign Relations and all of these secret bodies that have been propped up by all the buzzword names, all the buzzword families, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, um, Zelensky's, what's his name? I'm blanking on his name right now. Who was an important part of the Club of Rome. All of these unelected governing, agencies and secret bodies that have been developing this for decades and decades and decades, and now we're watching it roll out. That's what's happening. But within this, they still needed some sort of foundational mechanism to put this all into action. Of course, that is through this idea of planetary stewardship, right? This idea of using sort of environmentalism as the global cause, to go transnational with this, right? That we are all here to be stewards of this global spaceship called planet Earth, right? This round ball flying through space as a speck in an infinite universe. It's that this is all we got, right? So within that planetary stewardship, of course, in environmentalism, then they can pack in that as the acting principle behind pushing out these uh, protocols and different systems that will, by the look of it, for the average person, look like to have a great cause, right? To save the planet. Of course, because the epistemological framework comes out of scientism, not even just purely the scientific method, but literally scientism, which is a religion of sorts, of an atheistic religion that is puts forth the ideals of sort of the what the scientific elite believe in over even rational conclusions that would come from the scientific method. It is very much a religion. And with that, they, of course, have to put forth these ideas around global warming. A huge part of this whole rollout, planetary management, of course, is like the World Health Organization, right, to control viral outbreaks. Even back in 1968, the UNESCO Biosphere Conference, they were specifically talking about pathogenic spread through zoonotic disease. This idea that somehow, because of the increased industrialization of the world, and because humans now are somehow more interconnected with animals, which makes no sense because it seems like back in the day when humans were actually all farmers and had their own livestock, they were much more typically day to day interacting with animals. But that being said, another aspect of scientism is, of course, the virus, which I've gone over ad nauseum about how there is no conclusive scientific evidence that a virus has ever been isolated, and thus it is a logical fallacy to propose that it is due to viruses that we have pathogenic spread to between animals and humans to cause something like SARS-CoV-19 or whatever, the bird flu, swine flu, whatever, avian flu, bug, beetle flu, feline flu, whatever they're going to invent next, um, through their in silico manipulations, which just means they use computer data to put forth and show that through supposedly genetic data that these viruses exist. But anyways, without getting too off topic, yes, the scientism is very important because it always serves as the foundational sort of evidence to maintain the need to have these ethics so that we can then save the planet, right? So out of that then comes sort of a systemic thinking as the method. So once again, implementing these systems so that we can, like the WHO, World Health Organization, emergency systems, right? Designed to detect, assess, and respond to public health emergencies globally from the new viruses being spread. None of this is voted on. None of this goes through any local democratic legislation. It's just pushed through as systems that are technological, quote unquote, innovation. And so they do this by, once again, adhering to contracts. And Obviously, there is a what they call like stakeholder capitalism, right? Where you've got the private, quote unquote, private corporate world that is the ones that are doing the innovation, that are putting forth the technology without any much oversight, and then rolling that out. And by the time that it is in full play in society and people are up at arms about it, it is so interlocked into the overall plumbing of the world that it's very difficult to unwind. How we're seeing that right now, for instance, around when I go up out of the country that I live in, this beautiful river valley and the canyon here in the mountains. But when I go to visit our other place, and I'm in Southern Oregon, like in Medford, there are cameras everywhere. There are these flock cameras, you guys might have heard of, from this company Flock, that have put them, that have been basically just through the police department without any actual legislative process of people voting to decide if they could allow to put these up. I put them all over the street corners to track and trace people's license plates, their car, the features from sort of color and make and model and stickers on them. And there's actually been, funny enough, some I think the city of Eugene has been sued. I think Medford as well, from sort of more leftist leaning folks, including the ACLU, because there was evidence that ICE was colluding with the local authorities to get that data off those off the database from those cameras to track down illegals, or migrants and people that were part of the No Kings protest or whatever. I don't know. It's interesting, right? And like, although a lot of us chuckle at that, I think that's extremely valid point being made there. It's, and just an example of how technology is rolled out through the private um, side into the public with no oversight. And so, but this is nothing new. This has been sort of the modus operandi for decades and decades, and this is part of this goal of complete tech as governance, of the complete automation of society. And so, basically, you have this idea where the systems are the ones doing the thinking, right? Not any sort of local governance. And then with that, measurement is the universal language. So it's about, once again, collecting the data, getting in. It's a data-driven ecosystem, right? And so within that, data it's big. We even call it big data, right? How many times have I said over the years that none of those applications that you're interfacing with on your quote unquote smartphone or on the internet, like the Facebooks, the Web 2.3.0, or excuse me, Web 2.0 stuff, Google search, Instagram, TikTok, etc. Wow, they're all free, and it allow us, even Telegram, allow us to do all these amazing things on social media and place ads. And well, that's because it's all about data requisition and acquisition. Data is everything in an automation system, because data is what will ultimately be the overall guiding uh, uh, votes, if you will, for this governance, right? By collecting data on you as an individual, um, from your day to day activities, in terms of where you go, by the surveillance systems, the cameras that are being put everywhere, to your activity online via your everything you do on the internet, from social media to search, to your obviously your where you spend your money, what sort of who you're associated with, um, who and then of course, um, related to how you access healthcare, how you access education. All of that currently we're in a data acquisition phase of this. So there's this idea of a digital twin that has been very much supported by the World Economic Forum for years now, and has been put into place by actual many different cities now throughout the United States and throughout the world, um, where it's somewhat proposed to be innocuous, that it's just a means to provide more resilience for cities. Fire departments, for instance, I think in Colorado, are using a digital twin technology for to track fire behavior. And what they're doing is they're taking in real time data, right, from all of these sensors and cameras, and the facial recognition now being implemented at TSA, to temperature gauges all in all the cities, to even the traffic cameras. You ever go over sensors over a road that's just capturing how much vehicle traffic is going through a part of the city. All of this is data that they're collecting. Of course, the GPS tracking on the phones. Um, if anybody, I mean, uses Google Maps, I'm often guilty of it. I know there's much better open source stuff I should be using, at least more secure, and I'm not part of this system. And this is part of the solution I'll be getting into down the line. But you look on these ways and Google Maps, and you'll see the red zone, right, where it targets where traffic is. How does it know that? How does it know that there is a delay on the 5 freeway at a section in Los Angeles? Is because all of these phones have slowed down that are being tracked via the GPS software. And so it basically is using that as a service, right, to show you how the traffic flow is. I mean, so all of this data acquisition is very, very important for the automation systems at play. Um, and so this is essentially becoming a universal language. And of course, this is something that AI, as a language modeling system, will get better and better at acquiring, as well as all of this information, which currently, most of the companies that are acquiring this and the agencies say that this is, secure, it's on their own servers, it can't be put in a single place. But you got to question that. We've got the NSA with massive data centers. We've seen over and over again through many, many investigative processes and from independent journalists and freedom of information FOAs, that this information is from, whether it be the Twitter leaks, or through Meta, through all these large corporations, which are the ones running this, pretty much this Skynet. They have shown over and over again that they do not actually respect privacy, that this is very easily shared amongst not only government agencies, but within leaked to China and other places. So I'm not very confident that this is actually, if you go to these sites and they tell you, yes, this is encrypted and secure and sequestered, and when you go scan your face to go to a foreign country right now, they say they get rid of that image within 72 hours. Once again, lawfully, legally, that may be the case, but the technology is already is far surpassed any of that legality. And it is also because it's private corporations whose stakeholders run the show, not any sort of local governance. They would much rather do the backhand deals for increased automation, for increased profits and efficiency, based upon, once again, their religion of scientism. And then if there is some sort of flare up, some sort of independent, people-led, freedom focused coalition that raises a stink, well, we'll take you to the courts, and we've got billions of dollars to spend and get you stuck in litigation for years while this just keeps rolling on, right? But the idea is to not even have to deal with that by gatekeeping as enforcement. So this is an extremely important element to this idea that before, in order to control, there was sort of this idea of keeping people compliant through punishment, right? You had a societal strata, a caste system in many places, right? But it's like back to Jayne Eyre's time, where if you stepped out of place, out of your typical, what your role is in society, you were punished. And that took a lot of human capacity, a lot of a human effort, and then of course within that you still had the legal system in play, and that's just not efficient according to the machine, according to automation. What's much more efficient is just gatekeeping as enforcement, so keeping people compliant. And so there is no more punishment needed. Um, so historically, financial clearinghouses, the institutions that settle transactions between banks, have concentrated enormous power precisely because they sit at the bottleneck between those banking institutions, right? They can sort of gatekeep there because they are that important part of the plumbing, and that's the only role they serve. And it's sort of the interloper, the middleman, right? Well, modern governance has copied that architecture and extended it across every domain. The logic works like this: if you want to operate, you must get approved. If you want approval, you must be certified. If you want certification, you must comply. And if you don't comply, you aren't punished in any traditional sense. You're simply excluded. And we've seen this. We saw this during COVID, especially, right? No mask, no entry. That wasn't being, um, yeah, we had mandates and things, but that wasn't actually being enforced through some sort of lawful jurisdiction. That was through simple policies and procedures on the corporate side. Those were the meddling middleman that were enforcing that, right? And that was automated across society pretty much, unless you were lucky enough to live in a place where um, was non-corporate. Like for me, I was able to do business on a lot of mom and pops that fortunately were hip and awake to the agenda and didn't require masking. And but even them, you had enough. Funny enough, even some of those places through this consensus, right, of the locality, you had enough Karens complaining. Where then I showed up one day, for instance, to the health store, and now they had mask signs everywhere. Like, what's going on? I asked, talked to the manager. Oh, well, we had a bunch of ladies, bunch of Karens complaining and said it was unsafe what we were doing. So now we require everyone to wear masks. You know, brainwashing, once again, through the automation loops, takes out the autonomy. Those people now, through the epistemological framework of scientism, i.e., that a virus is going to kill you um, because of set so and so officialdom from the scientific, uh, institutions, right, have deemed this to be the reality through the halls of academia and with the white clad scientist, right, who puts this out through mass media. Now we have this supposed consensus that ekes into the locality, and without having to without the need of having literal, you know, uh, people on the corners explaining, okay, this is important why we wear masks and blah blah blah. No, you just have mass media, and you just have on social media. And but really what it was people self policing, right? It was the people tattling on their neighbor. It was the people that were choosing to enforce um, these arbitrary, um, mandates and commands out of fear, out of ignorance, but really just trying to toe the line of the automation system. And so COVID was really a fantastic way for them to test a lot of this, of course, and also at the same time rolling out a lot of the automation technology, not only the wireless infrastructure, but also a lot of the uh, infrastructure around the systems at play, like the World Health Organization, different alert systems, and you've got even like the UN trying to roll out their emergency platform, which I'll get into. Um, but you have the gatekeeping. So, and we see that with social media, of course, with censorship, people's accounts getting shut down. You've got the shadow banning is a great example, right? Where you still are out there. Shadow banning is genius because not only does it allow for the data collection to continue, to track and trace all of the data coming out of alternative thinking people that are dissidents, people that are free thinkers, because that's gold data for the system. And I'll explain why in a second. But also, then it deflates the creator because they're not getting the numbers they need. They're not able to do the advertising. They're not able to actually make a living off the work they're doing. And it also deflates them because it gives the appearance that there's not an audience out there that actually is tuning in and taking in this information. And so it silos them through really an artificiality into their own sort of corner, and it's quite despairing. And I saw this happen to many influencers that were censored and then heavily shadow banned, where they just gave up during the COVID times and just went on to do different things in their life. It does work. Um, so yeah, the gatekeeping is important, and then with the gatekeeping, something that then is the next extremely important level. Um, and once again, with the gatekeeping, this is a neutral infrastructure, right? It's all about safety and trust and quality assurance and system stability, right? All of these yummy feel good words. Meanwhile, it quietly produces a reality where what matters isn't your rights in theory, but your access status in practice. And so, what are we talking about? We're talking about access via a social credit score, right? Which is coming, which is in the works. And so this is now this idea of a score. The score is the quantification. It is um, it is not qualitative by any means. It has to do with specific computational data, like they have to set specific parameters to know that because this is ones and zeros, this is machine learning, this is gamification of reality. These aren't human being. I mean, I assume on some of these social media networks, there are human beings that are still sort of looking over this stuff. But once again, the idea is to get the human being out, right? Because the human being is inefficient. So, that being said, it's about applying parameters to know when you're being a dissident on YouTube, for instance, that you have, due to the buzzwords that are being flagged on specific videos. And if you've put a like on that video, um, for instance, a video that's talking about, I don't know, dispelling germ theory. Okay, let's say, which of course is a huge, huge pylon of the control matrix. Um, and in doing that, let's say you go on and you leave or you give it a like, and you subscribe, and you give it a positive comment. Well, that is flagged by the system, and points are deducted, right? And so that actually hurts your score. And so that is essentially within the plumbing that's being worked on, and we've seen it. I mean, people can say, "How do you know that's happening, Mike?" Well, because I've literally, as a YouTube creator, have not only dealt with strikes aplenty for the content I put out, but also, especially during COVID, was flagged for comments on other videos, and was put in timeout for just my interactions within the YouTube infrastructure ecosystem. But this is the grammar. It's performance metrics stop being measurement, and they become the policy, right? So this is where the governance is going. It's going based upon the gamification of your score. People stop managing reality and start managing the score instead. As he says here in this article, if you've ever watched a workplace transform into a world of dashboards and targets where hitting the numbers matter more than doing the work well, you've seen this template in action. And once that mentality becomes normal, the next step follows naturally. If you can make funding conditional at the program level, you can make transactions conditional at the payment level. And this is the big one, conditional payment as the leverage. Remember, this system is always looking for leverage to take your autonomy out. The more leverage somebody has over you, the harder it is to maintain autonomous. In the same way, the master over the servant was able to, many times, unless you're a strong-willed Jayne Eyre, um, maintain control over that servant. So this is going to be a whole other Substack I'm going to do, the CBDC, the rollout of this controlled currency, this idea that you're working a W-2 at a big corporation, you have a specific contract set in play, but based upon maintaining a proper social credit score, right? And if, for instance, you're working for Alphabet and you are seeing a surveillance camera at a Bitcoin rally, and your score then gets deducted at a certain point, then maybe that the next paycheck will have a deduction, or maybe it'll be stalled until you get your score back up. This could also be in play for your health insurance, you know, Medi-Cal, let's say, getting basically pulled for until you get that score back up. It could be your tax return being reduced or held up until you get your score back up. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So conditional payment, of course, is going to require some sort of new money system that has an interoperability within this automation system. And we don't have that yet. Yes, we have SWIFT and we have the overall banking system that is digital, right? Very few people use physical cash anymore. However, the plumbing there is set up still with the old guard system. However, the shift is being planned, and that will be a whole other Substack. So then once they've got the leverage with the money system, then it's all about emergency. Emergency is system output as the on switch. And that will then completes the loop and then gets the automation going. So emergency is going to play a huge part. And that was what the COVID rollout was about, was a test of all of this through that emergency. Right. So once again, based on the scores, not laws, with this gamification reality, based on this sort of centralized ethic, right, of fabricated consensus through scientism, the score distances us from the quality, from the actual case by case depth of experience. Everyone is just data now. And the brilliance of this is that it's just the system. You can't point to any actors. You can't point to a deviant secret society. You can't point to a corrupt government. This is just the system and play. It's just what we've all supposedly consented to, right? So performance metrics become the policy. And so with the emergency, the idea that traditionally an emergency no longer is something that happens to you or me, right? But it's something that the system designates. It's a pre-specified protocols, okay, that turns on into emergency mode. This is what the UN emergency platform is looking to sort of, which hasn't launched yet, but is in the works, is to sort of become one of the first actual active mechanisms to finish this thing and launch this automation system. And so essentially what it's just looking at is the messiness of life, and then putting in specific protocols based upon thresholds, right? So if we get a certain threshold, for instance, of forest fires, that will kick off the emergency system that will then initiate the whole process of going down the line of, once again, kicking in a specific system that has specific methods, that's using the specific data that has already accumulated, and then using that measurement as the language, implementing the protocols, and then those that don't go with the protocols are gatekeeped, they're denied the services, and furthermore, then potentially having conditional access to the money system. And so that's it. That's the automation system, and it's going to, of course, rely upon the next. You know, I think it doesn't have to be. I want to make this very clear. It doesn't have to rely upon a next COVID-like. That's worldwide kind of emergency. That's the beauty of this is that they're setting up these systems so that your general hurricane season kicks it in. Um, a um, a crime spree, they can say, in a specific urban area. Anything that is sort of your regular, sort of normal, um, month to month, day to day, year to year crisis that we face in the modern times can, by the system, be deemed to be an emergency. And so this is designed to have exponential growth because the automation loop aims to increase efficiency. It's run through stakeholder capitalism, not even capitalism, it's through private stakeholders, right? That's why we have the State Street and the BlackRock and Vanguard, why they play such an important role, because they are essentially an important, as part of the last sort of human element here, to be pulling the strings without any oversight. And then slowly, though, those stakeholders, we won't need them anymore, because the data will be, and the scoring of the data will be all that's required once the systems are completely put in play, because humans are slow and inefficient. Politics gets in the way; it's not needed anymore, and so essentially, we have a fully embedded um, systemic automations system that it's accelerating, especially with the interfacing of AI, to the point where what do you do to stop it? Um, and so, we see this with the job destruction through automation and AI. Um, and it's like an endless wave, right? And it's quite daunting. Um, and this infrastructure resists dismantling. You've got procurement contracts that lock in for years. Vendors build to the prevailing standard. Remember, this is a technological underlay. I say an underlay, not an overlay. The overlay is sort of the scientism, right? But the actual plumbing is a is is corporatist run technological underlay that is set universally, globally, so that it's locked into play through global adoption, contractual agreements. It's a systemic infrastructure. It's how your iPhone interacts with all the other iPhone users and with all the apps on your phone, and then with the banking system, and then going to travel with the surveillance system there. And it's becoming harder and harder to do it without having your phone on you, right? Um, there's no longer, a lot of countries aren't using paper um, passports anymore. And how do you unwind that? Right now, you can opt out of that, and you can go through the rigmarole of going into a room and talking to an agent and showing your passport. And I know a lot of my lawfare friends will say that's always going to be an option. But if we see this as one, using an implied consensus to push forth a system that is not essentially um, bidden to even consider law, then I question how lawfare can end up playing down the line, or it will be very, very difficult to implement it. And I'm not trying to scare you all, because there's a lot of, I believe, higher overlay solutions here. And I believe the system has a lot of faults and can burn out. And we are seeing a lot of things that are keeping it from accelerating right now. But I wanted to lay out sort of what this whole plan is. And so yeah, you've got the compatibility requirements means that people are adopting in the same format. The same sort of software now is going across the board. You see also just in like media, everything is consolidating. It's like two companies own all the mass media now. You've got this sort of international alignment amongst um, the main digital infrastructure. You've got the NVIDIA chips going to China, going all over the world, right? These major companies, but within this, of course, this increased centralization, there is a weakness, and it actually becomes quite fragile. And I'll be getting into that down the line. My dog is driving me crazy. One second. She would not give up. Oh, barking at the door for like 40 minutes to get in. Um, what a stubborn creature. Just another example of the stubborn nature of uh, organic life. But yes, so this system is what's interesting about this is this takes out all the sort of humanness out of this with this strategy. However, this technocracy, while it looks quite frightening and it's being rolled out quickly, um, it's also, once again, quite fragile. And we see this through hacks, for instance, and that can give interlopers and um, hackers access to vast amounts of data. Um, and that can be wielded against these systems. And it's because data is basically the currency of the future. The ability to get in and change data and mess with it and wipe things out. That's going to be something, of course, that is extremely um, worrisome for the technocrats. Also, of course, the mass amount of energy required to run these systems. Because once again, the infrastructure of scientism must put forth the scarcity models around energy consumption. So, because of that, because obviously they could not allow it for any information to get out, that there's etheric mechanisms for pulling energy out of the ether. That would cause an entire revolution of thinking and a whole new way of life. So they have to maintain combustion and sort of the destruction model of energy creation. And in doing that, that is very expensive and it requires a mass amount of healing. Healing. Well, it does. It will require a bunch of healing. But no, because of the heating, it requires a mass amount of cooling. So now we have lots of water requirements, which ironically is environmentally destructive. um, and so, yeah, the energy requirements is just going to be crazy. And overall, of course, the need to continue to gaslight and to um, quell any dissidents through, once again, this need to gatekeep. So it it's interesting seeing it, and I think there's a lot of solutions. Now, of course, one of the main solutions that I will continue to propose is decentralization, distributed open source technology that is more in tune with nature, collaborative technology, technology that is entrepreneurial and independent, more localized systems, systems that are transparent and dealing with consensus that is not only just localized and transparent, but also um, consensus that isn't based upon controlling dynamics like access to specific resources. For instance, a consensus based on just an open consensus based on the ability to be have your own tie into conscience, right, and to what is right, and to autonomy based consensus, and consensus that's based on truth and actual truth and not contrived truth through controlled systems of that we get, like in scientism. And then also by of course in alignment with in nature, because this is once again always a counter to nature and to the true way that this place functions. And so there's so many solutions. Cordal is, of course, I will be talking a lot about Cordal this year because it tries to have a digital infrastructure that's in alignment with these principles, based on collaboration, based on open source and distributed um, systems that have a consensus based on time, not based on resources or access to you know traditional financial um, you know fiat dollars giving you more power on consensus. It's based more on energy of output and intention, uh, and then having the ability to get outside of the automation loop. That's key, right? During COVID, people that were able to do commerce with their neighbors and get raw milk from a local ranch that they bartered with, that had the ability to communicate ideas through alternative platforms without censorship. We saw the explosion of things like BitChute and Rumble and these other Odyssey and these alternatives to YouTube. They're all out there. And so it's about really, I think, this renaissance that I could see happening is seeing this sort of panopticon surveillance state that's trying so hard to fulfill this automation system as sort of the last gasp of scientism. And the youth, especially, they want truth, they want beauty, they want real. It's an inherent need as a human to want the real stuff of life. And so, yeah, they can try to collateralize everything, tokenize everything, because once again, it's about the data, it's about the gamification of reality. So tokenizing real world assets is a huge part of this. And I think, you know, call me a half glass full kind of guy, but maybe that's why we're seeing silver exponentially explode right now. But people want their hands on real things, real assets that have real value, that is both qualitative and quantitative. People, you see the explosion in bookstores again, and people buying vinyl. The hipster's back. So I'm going to be covering this idea in a future Substack about the new Renaissance and getting back to the physical sort of study library of having a place to get away from everything and get in grounded in truth. And then sort of, I think the hip cats of the future won't be walking around with a phone on them. And this is all, of course, spiritually leading us towards more of an enlightened state, where we can start to have our true human apparatus light up again, right? To move into the psychic realm and to move into our ability to get out of just pure material needs and truly embody our full spiritual self. So lots of solutions. I am really focusing on Cordal right now. If you guys want to find me on there, please go to cordal.dev, download the software, get on Hub. You can then DM me. I'm just Winner, all caps, WINNER. You can send me a message. I'll send you some court so you can register a name. You can also just go in the general chat and just introduce yourself. You won't have a name yet. You'll just be your Cordal address and say you were brought in by Mike Winner, and people will send you court. Or you can help the network out by bringing in some Litecoin or Bitcoin or another pirate and exchanging it for court, and then getting your name. The name's important because and it can be anything. That is your how people find you, message you, versus a long string of characters as a public address. And you will be the only name on the blockchain. It'll be a unique name unto yourself. So that's fun. So if someone wants to send you some crypto, they can do that straight to your name. I know when I say the word crypto, that sends people's hackles up. I'm literally talking about tokenization and virtual world, and how can I be talking about crypto? Well, I will say 99% crypto is vaporware. It is scams. It is part of the problem. However, when dealing with a digital apparatus of control that's centralized and that's seeking to automate everything, to have something like Cordal, which is the opposite of that, it has to do with you run your own system yourself. You put the work in yourself. It is about having autonomy through a digital system, and allowing us to connect across space and time. There are amazing innovations and amazing awakening that's come out of the internet. And I don't think we can put that back in the box. So we need to go back to first principles and to have a means to not only have communication that's secure and decentralized and encrypted, and allowing us to have that autonomous communication that we once had in person, sitting in a house together. But to be able to do that across space and time gives us so much power. And then to be able to do commerce across space and time in that way, using a currency that is grounded in a consensus model based on time, is really unique. And but once again, we need to diversify too, and have the local meetups, and go have the local farmers markets and bartering, and definitely diversify your assets into gold and silver. And I'm even going to dollar cost average a little bit of Bitcoin, and try to support Bitcoin through Cordal, because I think it could be a massive win to get Bitcoin off the centralized systems and onto a truly decentralized new internet, because most people rely upon centralized internet ecosystem to engage with Bitcoin. And there's just too much gatekeeping there, too much control now. But to be able to cross swap Bitcoin to court is person to person without any intermediary, and doing that on a system that isn't interfacing with the World Wide Web and centralized servers is pretty badass. So, yeah, that's about it for today. Okay, next one, I'm going to do one on CBDCs, where we're at right now with the digital currency infrastructure, and then also about when I finish Jayne Eyre, I'll do a little review on this fantastic novel. Love you. And hope you guys have, if I don't talk to you before this, have a great new year. This year is the year of the fire horse. It's a year of great change, I believe. And it's going to be one, the numbers numerically, 2026 equals 10. So it's an end of it. It's sort of the end of the cycle, beginning of the cycle. So this is a year of great transformation, transmutation. Very exciting. 2025 was pretty rough for a lot of people. It was a really rough one. And yeah, I really believe that we can do great things in 2026. Okay. Love you guys. Peace.